This hearing of the Subcommittee on Conservation and Forestry, titled Challenges and Successes of Conservation Programs in 2020, will come to order. Welcome and thank you for joining today's hearing with Mr. Kevin Norton, Acting Chief of the Natural Resources Conservation Service, Mr. Tim Palmer, President of the National Association of Conservation Districts, Mr. Steve Patterson, Senior Vice President of Corporate Marketing, Communications and Government Affairs for Southern States Cooperative, Dr. Karen Waldrop, Chief Conservation Officer for Ducks Unlimited, and Mr. Jonathan Kappas, Assistant Professor at the Department of Agricultural and Consumer Economics at the University of Illinois. After brief remarks, the hearing will begin and will be open to questions. Members will be recognized in order of seniority, alternating between majority and minority members. When you are recognized, you will be asked to unmute your microphone, and you will have 5 minutes to ask your question or make a comment. In order to get to as many questions as possible, the timer will stay consistently visible on your screen. Good morning, and welcome to today's hearing on the challenges and successes of conservation programs in 2020. I hesitate to say this, but in these unprecedented times, it goes without saying that the way NRCS operates and serves stakeholders and landowners across the country looks very different these days. And perhaps more importantly, the realities facing farmers and producers as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and subsequent economic downturn are about as different today as one could imagine compared to when the 2018 Farm Bill was passed. We're here today to examine the ways NRCS is adjusting to the new normal of serving customers and administering programs amid the pandemic, how producers and farmers are utilizing conservation during these dual crises, what challenges NRCS is experiencing, what successes the agency has had that we can build upon, and what role conservation could play in the upcoming, hopefully, economic recovery, and whether there are additional flexibilities that farmers and producers may need within the existing conservation programs to ensure that they are able to continue the important work of conservation during these uncertain times. Since the 1930s, NRCS has worked to provide producers with technical support and financial assistance to achieve the benefits of a healthy and productive landscape. In 2019 alone, NRCS and its partners worked with more than 500,000 producers on over 43 million acres to build conservation plans and implement practices that increase production, reduce input costs, conserve natural resources, and protect wildlife habitat. Together, these actions not only have a positive impact on farms, but also on their neighbors, their watersheds, and the entire U.S. population. In my home state of Virginia, NRCS works with 47 soil and water conservation districts and partners at the state and local levels to make sure Virginia's farmers and landowners have the assistance and resources they need to protect soil and water quality across our Commonwealth. Yet in Central Virginia and across the country, the process of administering and delivering successful and meaningful conservation programs has grown increasingly complex over the years. For one, the forces acting on our soil and water and air are themselves becoming more extreme, and we see more frequent and intense impacts as a result of climate change, frequent storms, flooding across the Midwest, hurricanes in the Southeast, historic wildfires in the West. And adding to this complex environment is the COVID-19 public health crisis. In addition to its human toll, it has rippled through the agricultural sector as well. For these reasons, it's imperative that we take a hard look at the way we deliver our conservation programs so that we can make sure we are able to accomplish their important goals in light of the challenges that exist. We know that NRCS programs not only help producers adapt to climatic conditions to protect food and fiber production, but can even help reverse the effects of climate change. We also know that conservation programs can assist communities in recovering from the economic shocks like the ones presented by COVID-19 by generating significant economic activity and supporting a variety of jobs in rural communities. It's worth noting that conservation spending, including implementation of practices, direct payments to farmers, administrative costs, results in an injection of dollars into local economies. For example, from 2014 to 2017, $2.6 billion was invested in the Conservation Technical Assistance Program. This investment generated an average of $4 billion in economic activity and supported 12,100 jobs each year. Throughout this hearing, I am eager to hear from our experts on conservation program delivery, especially in light of this rapidly evolving landscape. I'm also interested in hearing how conservation can contribute to the well-being of farm operations and aid in COVID recovery. I also specifically would love to hear from our witnesses their perspectives on the ability of NRCS field staff to service producers as the environmental landscape evolves, including updated staffing needs of the department, efforts to attract qualified staff, and what personnel resources are required to optimize the ability of these critical programs to accomplish their next goals. With that, I look to the ranking member, Mr. LaMalfa of California, for his comments.
Well, good morning, and thank you, Chair Spanberger, for holding today's hearing to review the successes and challenges of the conservation programs in 2020. Of course, in January of this year, our subcommittee heard from NRCS Chief Lohr and FSA Administrator Fordyce regarding the implementation of the conservation programs included in the 2018 Farm Bill. Since that time, our country has been through, and I don't have to tell you here today, an extended period with the COVID situation. So while much was shut down, of course, farmers and ranchers continued to make sure the Americans still had access to the safest, most abundant, and most affordable food supply in the world. The season does not wait for virus. Have to get it done. NRCS field offices also continue to work to serve their customers. Although there were some restrictions, NRCS employees have adapted and continue to administer these critical conservation programs. Almost 2 years ago, Congress passed the 2018 Farm Bill that protected mandatory funding in the conservation title, increased funding for EQIP, which is known as the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, and ACEP, the Agriculture Conservation Easement Program, and provided a separate funding allocation for RCPP, the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. The 2014 Farm Bill made significant reforms like consolidating over 20 conservation programs into 13. The 2018 Farm Bill built upon these successes by streamlining program administration to provide for better delivery. These changes were designed to improve access to conservation programs all across the country, and I'm proud of the results so far we've seen, specifically in my home state of California. For example, the California Rice Commission was recently awarded nearly $5.5 million in RCPP funding to maximize waterbird habitat on rice lands in California. So I'd like to congratulate Chief Kevin Norton on his role as acting Chief of Natural Resources Conservation Service and welcome him here today. Of course, he has a long history of service in NRCS, included as Louisiana State Conservationist as a detailee to the Senate and House Ag Committees during the 2014 and 2018 Farm Bill, and most recently as Associate Chief of NRCS. Thanks for being here, sir. Also like to thank our second panel of witnesses as they come up a bit later for being here. With the input and expertise of stakeholders like you, we've been able to improve conservation and programs over the years so that they work better for our farmers and ranchers. I look forward to a productive discussion with both panels of witnesses to hear about their successes and challenges of the programs in 2020. And I thank Chair Spanberger, and I will yield back.
The chair would request that other members submit their opening statements for the record so witnesses may begin their testimony and to ensure that there is ample time for questions. I'd like to begin by first welcoming our first witness. Thank you for being here today, Chief Norton. Mr. Kevin Norton serves as acting chief for NRCS. He began his career with NRCS in 1981 as a ranger conservationist in Oklahoma and has since served in a number of other roles within the agency, including as the NRCS State Conservationist for Louisiana and most recently as the NRCS Associate Chief. We will now proceed to hearing your testimony. I thank you for being here today, sir. You will have 5 minutes, and when 1 minute is left, the light will turn yellow, signaling that your time is close to expiring. Mr. Norton, please begin when you are ready.
Thank you, and good morning, Chairwoman Spanberger, Ranking Member LaMalfa, and Chairman Peterson, and members of the subcommittee that are joining us via the teleconferencing functionalities. Thank you for this opportunity. Really a privilege to be before you today to discuss the challenges and successes of the Natural Resources Conservation Service and the delivery of our programs this past year. As you have said, it has been an unprecedented year with external influences applying unusual pressures on our staff, adjusting to some degree, and then the way we've operated at the field level. Our discussion today will highlight the resiliency and dedication of the NRCS team and our partners as we ensured service delivery to our customers. But I want to start first by thanking and expressing a great appreciation to the farmers, ranchers, and forest stewards throughout this country who adopt voluntary conservation, a lot of times without cost share or with cost share financial assistance that y'all provide to us through the Farm Bill, as they work to meet their needs and the needs of agriculture, forestry, the natural resources, and provide a multitude of services to our great nation. As you said, Mr. LaMalfa, agriculture never stopped. We had to be there for them. It is noteworthy during this challenging year that we did complete 115,000 conservation plans with producers. We installed conservation measures on over 1 million acres of conservation practices, and this would not have happened without the dedicated staff, the work of our partners coming together and contributing to the collective efforts to service our customers and the natural resources. In identifying some challenges, I'll share a few things with you. The pandemic obviously was the most important challenge impacting our agency today. However, under no time did the NRCS cease operations at any location in the United States. We were available by varying means to continue the field work. We abided by the protocols of social distancing and those kind of things, and we were able to continue delivering the field work, applying the conservation measures on the field, and then also working to put those funding that y'all provided to us into contracts via some very innovative type things. And we have done that through opening our services by phone, connecting folks from the office call to their home phone, email, fax, and more importantly, bringing web services available for them to access our customers. We have extended the field office, our servicing points, to our employees' homes and into the homes of our customers, and with great success. By the time the year ends, and I will tell you, when this all started, we really did have some concerns about our ability to continue to deliver these programs with all of the things that were happening and the varying degree of local regulation, local influences on how we could move about and do things. The department gave us a latitude to still get into the field, to be there and to be available, and by the time we closed out the year yesterday, we saw very little impact on the work that we needed to do throughout the year. So it was quite a success. As you indicated, we talked a little bit at the last hearing. Chief Lohr talked about our staffing. Our collective efforts of priority hiring, using direct hire authority, it had a positive impact. I'm pleased to report today, while we're not yet at the goal that we had set for ourselves of 10,445 positions by mid-year, we have had 2,900 new people join our agency. We have had attrition through separations, retirements, and those kind of things. But we are very close to 9,400 people, and that is at least 700 more than any number that we've had in the past 2 years. So we are on a positive trajectory. We are making inroads. So we are beginning to see the staffing improved. The focus of all of these efforts are the field servicing points, those state offices down to the field offices where we interact and connect with our customers. Throughout this year, there have been many challenges, but there have been many successes. We talk about the impacts on the livestock industry with the pandemic and production supply problems. We have created a new CART system for our unified, streamlined application evaluation process, and many achievements about conservation implementation, where we are on pace with all the work that we had this last year. I will close with my comments and say, when I reflect back on 2020 and the challenges that were laid out before us, it is only because of the resiliency of the entire NRCS team, from the field level through to our national office, the adjustments that we made in being more flexible about our service, and that we, NRCS, and our partners that are helping us service the customers, that we have been able to achieve the accomplishments that we had this past year. We responded With all of this going on, we continued our response to the wildfires, the hurricanes, and the floods, the major impacts that are happening. That work will continue. We don't solve those issues and address them overnight. We're still gathering information. We've completed delivery of our conservation programs, numerous initiatives. We established and stood up the Office of Urban Agriculture that was provided instruction in the Farm Bill, and we're continuing to lead forward in addressing emerging natural resource issues and needs. So with that, I want to thank you for your continued support, your confidence, the authorities that you have given us through the Farm Bill and the financial assistance programs to continue to work with customers and address the natural resource issues of our nation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Chief Norton. Old habits die hard, I apologize. At this time, members will be recognized for questions in order of seniority, alternating between majority and minority members. You will be recognized for 5 minutes each. In order to allow us to get to as many questions as possible, please keep your microphones muted until you are recognized in order to minimize background noise. When 1 minute is left, the light will turn yellow, signaling time is close to expiring. I will first recognize myself for 5 minutes. So, Chief Norton, I want to first congratulate and thank you for all of the work that your agency has done. The staffing numbers, I know in prior months we had, on this committee, had concerns about staffing levels within NRCS, and certainly hiring during a global pandemic is an impressive feat, so I'm pleased to hear that you all are on a positive trajectory. I would like to get the conversation started within a focus of conservation more broadly. It's essential to helping farmers build resiliency, boost their bottom line, improve production, stimulate local economies. We know these things to be true, but certainly during the COVID-19 crisis, farmers are facing such significant challenges. What do you see the role for conservation programs as part of how farmers can respond to and recover from the COVID-19 crisis? Are there any particular opportunities that conservation programs could present as farmers are continuing to plan for the future amid our current reality?
Thank you for that question. So, I really believe and think that we have demonstrated that we will be able to continue delivery of all of our conservation portfolio, even through things like that. We have no idea as we look across the country of when all of our offices will be back to full open status. But I see the needs of those producers out there have not changed. They're making applications for the program. It's about them achieving resource sustainability, doing the adjustments to their operation, and us being able to continue to do that because that is their livelihood. It's their, in many cases, it's their generational farm. Yeah. And I see not a lot of difference from our perspective other than the way we service people. And it has changed. We were very much a face-to-face engaging agency, and it is remarkable how successful we have been in using the technologies around us to engage with those producers so that they can have those contracts, they can get those conservation plans, and they can get the conservation work implemented. So I see continuing this path and continuing to innovate around the way we engage and have opportunities for them, but we want to be there for them for the conservation work they need to do on their operations.
And you talked about the adjustments that NRCS has made, certainly the adjustments that our producers are making. Are there additional flexibilities that we, members of Congress on this subcommittee, flexibilities that we should consider for conservation programs that would help maintain farmer engagement and help reduce uncertainty during this challenging time?
We believe at this point, y'all have, in this last Farm Bill, you provided us a tremendous amount of flexibility. We need to continue that. The idea that conservation, well, just looking at the chairwoman and the ranking member, the conservation needs of your state couldn't be any different. Water quality is water quality, but how you deal with that in Virginia versus California, tremendously different. Having those flexibilities so that we can shape that conservation program delivery to what is needed is the thing that we need to continue. We do not need to be unduly influenced of setting priorities at one level that don't really work across the landscape. And the authorities that you've given us, the flexibility, allows us with our state conservationists and the state technical committee, the partners there within the state, to really address those conservation issues as they reside locally within that state. So I think it's a continuation of that locally led effort that is local even at the county level, but at the state level give us the flexibility to deliver the programs that best address the issues and the needs there in the state.
Well, I thank you for the kind words about the 2018 Farm Bill, and I give full credit to my colleagues up here because that predates me. So thank you to the chairman, Ranking Member Conaway and Ranking Member LaMalfa for your good work on that. To just close out in the last remaining seconds that I have, I was wondering if you could just speak to very, very broadly, if you were making a pitch to some of our colleagues who do not serve on the Agriculture Committee, who may not have exposure to these programs, about what they could mean in agricultural communities across the country as we are rebuilding our economy out of COVID, how do you see these programs really being part of that continued economic engagement and part of the hard work of recovering our economy?
Yes, we are a nation that produces. We feed our people, we feed the world, and we do it in a very sustainable fashion. I grew up in Oklahoma. I grew up with stories of the Dust Bowl, worst environmental catastrophe we ever had. We're producing agriculture efficiently, effectively, and with good environmental practices, stewardship. And those things continue. It keeps moving, as was been discussed earlier in y'all's testimony. Things move. We need to help. We need to be there with these programs, these dollars, to help our conservation, our farmers, our ranchers, our forest landowners, those people on the ground. We need to help them move conservation and adapt and adjust, because it's not, what we do is about environmental sustainability, economic sustainability, but sustainability of society. Mm-hmm. And we have to help them move, and we have to help them continue to be productive, because the benefits to them applying proper conservation extends way beyond the farm. It extends to the watershed that they're operating in, the community that they live in, as you shared about the rolling out of the money and how it feeds across, but it's also is the health and society and the well-being of our nation, the security of our nation is vested in the conservation work we do. We cannot feed this world on depleted natural resources, and we have a solid resource base. We need to continue to sustain that and work in partnership with the people on the ground that have stewardship of those resources to be successful.
Thank you very much. I now recognize the gentleman from California for 5 minutes.
Thank you. You know, we've heard from the Secretary numerous times that the improving and having great customer service is a priority for the department, and so I just we're wondering in your department how the you had a workforce analysis that was done for NRCS, mm-hmm. and the technical capacity has been something that's been being looked at, and how's that going versus the capacity versus the need going forward, and then do you have the people that you need to deliver these conservation programs at the same time as you're working on the technical capacity that agriculture needs these days?
Mm-hmm. Very good question. As we shared and as y'all discussed in the last hearing, we are not at a staffing level that we need to be by any of those tools that we're using, the Optimal Productive Office and the Cycle Time Study. We do have the authority and the opportunity to grow to 11,011 people. So whether that's enough when we get there, we need to get there first. We know we are understaffed, but we are gaining staff.
11,000?
11,011, yes.
Precisely 1111.
Yeah, well,
right.
That's what the models kick out, so we'll just go with it.
Good, well, that's precise.
But we're on our trajectory to get there. Actually, COVID probably slowed us down. The challenge of getting people hired. But, sir, I think we're on the right path. We have made gains this year. We have improvement we can still do, that we are getting a lot of support from the Farm Production and Conservation Area Business Center. So y'all have given us a lot of resources with the Farm Bill, both financial and technical assistance resources. The technical assistance is what we staff with, that what we work with partners to get the delivery out onto the ground. We are investing those strategically and as efficiently as possible while we're still trying to get the financial assistance dollars out. So right now, I think we're on our way. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Well, you're having successes out there, even with the difficulty of what we're going through this year. I talked with the Cal Rice people here and ongoing, and they want me to let you know, that they're very thankful for the help with NRCS for funding and et cetera for the salmon rearing project they have going on, a couple hundred acres of rice land adjacent to the Sacramento River. This is where small salmon are introduced into the area and feed up on all that great nutrients that are in the rice fields. And you get nice big fat salmon coming out of there and helping to get the population up in the Sacramento River system that everybody wants to. So that's been a very exciting partnership and avenue to see how that'll go. So I think they'll be looking for expansion to that, and I think there's more growers ready to line up and be part of that. So that's big thumbs up on that. I'm going to wear our chair out on this forestry question here. It's, obviously it's a huge issue in the West and in California. There's more fires than you can count right now in my home state and even in my district. But is NRCS's work to help, with landowners reduce fire risk? Again, we're having difficulty with forester capacity, boots on the ground, so to speak. And some states have fewer than others. So what can NRCS do to help address this issue? It's increasing the latitude a little bit of your scope there to be helpful in that department, since it really does seem to be an emergency, and then have that affect possible funding for landowners to put the practices in place that would help for the reducing wildfire risk on their lands and then maybe surrounding government lands too.
So thank you. Again, back to the Farm Bill and our authorities, beginning in 2014, we began to be get more flexibility around working on forest land. A lot of the limitations were taken off of it. We do work with private forest land. That's where we're focused, all of our work on private forest land. So we have a lot more flexibility in working with those folks that have forest land.
Is there any barriers we need to help you with that you know of? Anything that rule-wise or law-wise getting in the way from going farther?
I think we're in a good place. It's about local priorities. We're working with the Forest Service on this wildfire risk reduction, coming into partnership with them. We saw a success in one of the fires a couple of years ago, 2018, where they used the properties that we had actually done the forest stewardship on. That was a place that they went to put the preventive measures to stop the fire from spreading. So I think a lot of it, we have plenty of authority. It certainly is a matter of locally the priorities around funding and whether we're working on forest land, rice production, those kind of things. But we have a lot of tools to work with those folks and continue to work on forest stewardship level, forest health activities that would create the opportunity for less. The fires are going to happen whenever the conditions are right, but have a better chance of addressing the fire because you're working with a healthy forest and a diverse vegetation.
Yeah, so it comes back to, do you have the personnel and the funding to get after all these, right? So
yes, sir. And to your point, in this whole effort of hiring, we are looking at picking up additional forestry staff for our people. That's, again, about the state conservationists making the decisions of what they need, but we engage directly with state and private forestry interests for technical service assistance and have agreements that are complementing our service and filling gaps where we're absent. So we do have other avenues that we work with other partners to get forestry assistance
Great.
where we don't have the trained staff.
Great. Thank you, Chief Norton. I better yield back. Thank you, ma'am.
I now recognize the chairman of the full Agriculture Committee, Chairman Peterson, for 5 minutes.
Thanks, gentlelady. I'll be brief, and I'm going to have to bug out because I got other commitments I've got to take care of. And I don't know, I haven't really thought this through, but in the last month or so, I've been confronted by people that have complained that they're having difficulty getting into the CSP program. So some complaints about, I think, the nature of the program and not fitting their situation. And also, it seems like some people are saying that there's not resources to do, or for them to be able to, they won't even take their application, it sounded like. So is that going on? I mean, this is kind of anecdotal, but I mean, are you hearing those kinds of things, and is it something that's on your radar screen and you're doing anything about?
Sir, I can't speak specifically to that, but I can speak to one thing you said. If we have offices not taking an application, I need to know where they're at and who's not doing it. All of our programs are open to accept applications on a continuous basis. We do evaluation cycles, so if they're putting in an application after the evaluation cycle, they'll have to wait till the next time. But we are limited, to an appropriation amount relative to the number of contracts we can get to. The eligibility criteria did not adjust significantly, so it may be a factor of demand and just the amount of resources we have. And that they're
So that's kind of a state-by-state thing, isn't it? The state
Yes.
makes priorities. It sounded like some of these folks were discouraging them from applying because they didn't think there would be successful. So I don't know.
Just let me know, sir, because we should.
So
not
in the
be-
future, when I hear that, I'm going to pin them down and
Yes.
find out where they, where they applied and what the situation is. But is there? So you've revised the CSP 2 or 3 times, and the last time, I think it was a couple years ago, you came up with a new process, as I understand it. And you think that has improved the situation since that's been put in place, or you have any feedback on that?
Yes, so we had the conservation measurement tool that was developed out of the 2008 Farm Bill. Then we had the conservation assessment and ranking tool, or the conservation assessment evaluation, CATE, that came out of the 2014 Farm Bill. Now we've transitioned to the conservation assessment and ranking tool, CART. You were that was demonstrated to you. That has become in this effort of streamlining, reducing confusion, not having completely different approaches when somebody begins to work with us. This is a streamlined process so that they are all evaluated in a very common flow. And if CSP is the best place for them, we take them that way. If it's EQIP, they can go without having to come in and file a completely different application. So we are doing that, but still the priorities around CSP have not changed significantly. We are using a different tool, but the program has taken it to the same, hopefully, end goal that is authorized. So I think some of this may be, well, one is, again, back to our folks discouraging people. We shouldn't be doing that. We should take the application. We should go into the CART tool. We should work with them about their goals, their objectives, what their issues are, what they plan to do, and give them an honest feedback about where they're at. And then from that, they can make further decisions about whether they want to continue to make some adjustments so they're better eligible for CSP in the future, or whether they want to go to EQIP for a while and then come back and be very competitive to CSP. So that's the functionality we've got so that we can help people move forward in the right path. It's been a struggle for our field offices. It's a big change, but we've got there. At the end of the day, we got it done.
You survey people that have been through the process, producers that have gone in and, applied for CSP and been successful or unsuccessful. Are any of those surveyed? Is there any feedback given to you?
I don't have any right now. We've just, we're in the process of a broader customer service survey effort. It has not concluded yet. We don't expect a report until November. So we are looking at those kinds of things. We do work through this with the State Technical Committee, which is a very broad representation of organizations. We welcome feedback and discussion at the state level on those things, but I have no personal feedback. It's really all anecdotal, just as you described.
All right, thank you very much, and apologize for having to bug out, but appreciate you being here today. I yield back.
I now recognize the gentleman from Ohio for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Norton, for being here today and this morning, I should say. I'll just ask one brief question of the ranking member. Ask my big top question about the employee issue. But in your testimony, you tell us how 2021 will be an improvement compared to 2020. Have you crafted a plan to start the year strong?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Have you crafted the year for 2021 strong and speaking optimistically? I mean, what can you expect to see this time next year?
I believe we have. Certainly our objective had been to have everything ready to deploy today. We are still getting some software developed and things like that, but we have got a strong position to start where our folks can begin to engage in program delivery earlier than they typically do. So we are going in strong. We believe that all of the things that we've gone through this year have done nothing but make us better and stronger as we address 2021, and we don't have as much learning around our software, our tools, our evaluation process. The programs are now fairly stable, and we want them to stay stable through the balance of the Farm Bill. So, sir, I believe we have not yet got all the people we need in Ohio or any other location around the country, but we are on the upward trajectory with that. So I feel pretty good. We're maintaining a lot of the initiatives that we had in place. I know for Ohio, Lake Erie is a focal point. We're not pulling back at all from that effort. Our state conservationist is there working with the state and folks, and we're leaning into that effort. So I feel like we're going in strong. I'm pretty optimistic about this year.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. And Madam Chair, I yield back my remaining time.
Thank you very much. I now recognize the gentlewoman from Maine for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Here's hoping the sound works today. You can hear me.
We can hear you.
And certainly, great. Thank you, Chief Norton, for being with us today, and to the committee for holding this hearing. I want to raise an issue I've heard about in Maine regarding the RCPP program. This year's application includes new implementation of guidance on forest eligibility that appears to significantly restrict the type of forest lands that can qualify for the program. So as you can imagine, this has generated a great deal of confusion and concern among our applicants and existing RCPP projects, including a project that we have in the Sebago Lake watershed in my district, which is the watershed that provides drinking water for our largest city. So I'm concerned that this could, the new restrictions could limit easement enrollments and restoration activities performed on small family-owned forests, which are a substantial share of the forest land in Maine. So could you explain to me how the department is interpreting quote, non-industrial private forest land?
Yes, thank you. And there's been a lot of engagement with us too this past 2 weeks around the impacts of the sentence that we tacked on to the definition of non-industrial private forest land, more around the commercial side of things. In the Farm Bill, y'all did very well define non-industrial private forest land. So we have that definition. In 2019, when we did the APF for RCPP, we received feedback that we needed to be more clear about what was not non-industrial private forest land. And so that's where we got ourselves a little bit jammed up here, was trying to really say all of this forest land is private, what is non-industrial and what is industrial. And what we have determined that we're going to do is we are going to pull back that sentence, we will reissue the APF, and we will extend the period of application. At this point, we're believing November the 30th, but that's our plan at this point. I think the one thing that we're still struggling with is the discussion about how do you define industrial private forest land, because the whole conservation title is really built about serving family forest, not the vertical corporate forest interest or their subsidiaries or these larger 150, 200,000 acre operations that are pulled together by multiple investments and those kinds of things. So we don't really know how we really need to describe that and make sure that the face of our CPP is the things that y'all have wanted us to do with the Farm Bill as we understand them, and we don't move off into these $300 million of conservation dollars going off target to the more non-Title 12 type Farm Bill interests. So I think any feedback that y'all could give us along that line would be helpful, but we are trying to find a way to be sure that we stay true to the target audience of the conservation title, which is America's agriculture producers and smaller forest landowners around family interest. They can be corporations. We're not trying to stop any of that, but not do the larger business interest type things.
Great, that's very helpful, and I certainly can supply more info about the situation in Maine, because we're clear about what's a more industrial forest, the paper company owned lands. There's a variety of things that are very different than small family holdings that are managed for commercial use to keep the forest healthy, but certainly not, big multinational corporations, and finding that balance. So we'll follow up and send you a little more information. I'm about out of time, but let me ask you just quickly. The 2018 Farm Bill had some new on-conservation innovation trials to test some of the innovative approaches to conservation on agricultural land, and I'm interested in the part focused specifically on soil health. So I think the agency just announced a new round of awards earlier this week, and we may run out of time, but could you give me a little bit of a status update and how you plan to use the information collected through that program and through those trials?
Yes, $25 million total in that Authority of On-Farm Trials. We did our first grants last year. The agreements were done by the end of the year, so this is their first year of implementation, so we have no results yet coming back on any of those. We just announced our new suite, really a lot of interest, good response. We have about $10 million that's focused on the soil health issue, where we two things. The purpose of the on-farm demonstration trials is for it to be demonstration. People in the field can see it. They can have their neighbors. They can actually show, tell, and from a farmer's perspective, rancher's perspective, they can share what they've learned, their journey through this effort. But then we're gathering data, and we have currently awarded a small contract to build an interactive website that will actually make this available and serve up in a very user-friendly fashion for the broader agriculture population to look at what's going on in all of our conservation innovation grants and these on-farm trials and try to map their path to success if they want to go down that journey.
Great, that's wonderful to hear, and I yield back my time. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Before we close out the first panel, again, Chief Norton, I thank you for being here. I'm going to yield an additional 5 minutes to Ranking Member LaMalfa for any additional questions he may have.
Thank you again. I'll try and make it snappy here. I just wanted to follow up on EQIP and the success we've had in that. In the 2018 Farm Bill, it created a new authority known as Conservation Incentive Payments. So it's simplified, part of the streamlining that we've seen that came with the bill. It's intended to target natural resource concerns in specific regions of a state. We've had a lot of inquiries from constituents on how, and this is important, how they can provide input on the resource concerns and the practices that should be applied and would be most helpful. And I think nobody knows better than the people that live in and run those lands, whether it's farming or forests or firefighting, et cetera. So on this, can you provide any ideas or guidance on how to best provide for the locally led input for how these practices on the particular resource concerns? Because again, it would probably be very valuable input on having an effective program.
Yes, the process, as rightfully it should have been described, is a state-led process. Individual producers, if they have things that they would like to see as priorities, should communicate directly with the state conservationist. They should infuse those into the system. They can go to their local district conservationist, or they can send a letter directly to the state conservationist, say, I would like to see these priorities for incentive contracts. If they're members of producer organizations or interests that are reflected on the state technical committee, they need to engage there. It could be a state forestry association. It could be the California Rice. All of those folks have seats at the state technical committee. We are requiring our state conservationists to review and seek input from their state technical committee, which is that very large swath, includes universities, non-governmental organizations, state agencies, and local conservation districts. Gather it up there and set the priorities. So there's an opportunity there for those to be infused in it. Now's the time. Do not wait. Now's the time. You can always share information with us about better ways to do conservation. So now's the time to do it. We do plan our work right now is to have that component of EQIP operational in the first quarter of calendar year 2021.
Okay.
So we'll have it running this fiscal year, but we're not going to be able to get it out as an advertised enrollment option here in the first quarter.
So we can expect then that DC is going to be pretty deferential to the state level on once they've had this back and forth, this input with each other at the state level. DC is more likely to bless what the state says and not.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
We are going to put out parameters, and we're working on that policy. We expect the final rule to be out in the next several weeks, and it will be clear about the regulation around this incentive payment option. We'll have some parameters. There's a range of things that can happen, and then they can pick the practices, and then they will also be a part of constructing the payment rate that would be associated with that practice, and whether it's a 5-year payment, a 10-year payment, or some increment in between. We talk about forest stewardship, which is important to you. You can enroll a piece of ground, a forest piece of ground in this program and only do certain practices like once every 3 years. You wouldn't make a payment every year, but you could do a long-term contract with the authority and actually have a schedule so that if they need to do something once every 3 years, a prescribed burn or something like that, it can be in the contract as an incentive payment. But we can also do annual payments for other things.
Yeah, whatever makes sense in the situation.
Right.
So, all right.
Yes,
well,
sir.
thank you for that, Chief Norton, and I'll yield back. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. Well, Chief Norton, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for spending the morning with us, answering our questions. And again, we appreciate all your work as you continue to settle into the job, particularly during this challenging time. Thank you for your time, and we look forward to continued conversations with you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I would now like to welcome our second panel of witnesses. Thank you for being here today. And I recognize the gentlewoman from Iowa, Representative Axney, to introduce our first witness, Mr. Palmer.
Thank you, Chairwoman Spanberger. It is my honor and privilege, of course, to introduce Tim Palmer, a constituent of mine from Madison County and president of the National Association of Conservation Districts. Tim operates a 1,200-acre row crop and cow-calf operation, and he served on the Madison County Soil and Water Conservation District Board since 2003. In addition, he was appointed to the Iowa State Soil and Water Conservation Committee from 2012 to 2014, and Tim's been a vocal leader for Iowa producers and has extensive knowledge of conservation practices. Tim, I believe the last time I saw you was an event with Undersecretary Northey last August, if in Des Moines, if I'm correct. It's great to see you now before the committee, and I so look forward to our discussion. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
So much for the warm welcome.
Our second witness, I have the honor of introducing, Mr. Steve Patterson. I'm happy to welcome Mr. Patterson because he's a constituent of Virginia's 7th District. Mr. Patterson has served as a Senior Vice President of Marketing Communications and Government Affairs at Southern States Cooperative since 2001. His experience includes 35 years in business and agronomy, and he has earned numerous certifications in agriculture, including Certified Crop Advisor and Professional Agronomist, as well as Nutrient Management Consultant. Mr. Patterson, thank you for joining us here today. We are pleased to have you. And our third witness is Dr. Karen Waldrop. Dr. Karen Waldrop serves as Chief Conservation Officer for Ducks Unlimited Incorporated and operates as a strategic leader and member of DU's executive leadership team. Dr. Waldrop received her PhD in Wildlife Biology, Forest Sciences from Clemson University, and both her MS in Wildlife Biology, Forest Resources, and BS in Forest Resources from the University of Georgia. Prior to joining DU, Dr. Waldrop served as the Deputy Commissioner for the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources. Our fourth witness is Mr. Jonathan Kappas. Mr. Kappas is on the faculty at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign and the Director of the Gardner Agriculture Policy Program and the author of a legislative and political history of the Farm Bill. His previous roles have included Chief Counsel for the Senate Committee on Agriculture and Administrator of the Farm Service Agency at USDA. Mr. Kappas grew up on his family farm in Western Ohio and holds a JD from the George Washington University Law School. We will now proceed to hearing your testimony. Each witness will have 5 minutes, and when 1 minute is left, the light will turn yellow, signaling time is close to expiring, and you should be able to see that timekeeper on your screen before you. Mr. Palmer, please begin when you are ready.
And members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Tim Palmer, and with my family, we operate a farm near Truro, Iowa, in south central Iowa. We produce corn, soybeans, oats, hay, and beef cattle. Conservation has been a core tenet of our farming operation since its founding. I currently serve as the president of the National Association of Conservation Districts. NACD represents America's 3,000 conservation districts. Conservation districts are local units of government established under state law to carry out natural resource management programs at the local level. While I would like to keep my oral comments today specifically to the challenges and successes of conservation programs in 2020, I would note the importance of the conservation delivery system and NACD's role in it. As a farmer, I like to think of myself as an eternal optimist, so I'm going to begin my testimony with the successes of conservation in 2020. Although the pandemic has posed challenges to conservation delivery, the adoption of conservation practices provides opportunities to strengthen both our natural resources and our local economies. Implementing conservation practices makes operations more resilient, whether facing weather extremes or economic challenges. In 2017, NACD and DATU Research released a set of case studies detailing the budget data on producers' adoption of soil health practices such as cover crops and no-till. These showed that although planting costs increased by up to $38 per acre, yearly net income increased to $110 per acre. And efficiency is an important buttress against external shock to a farm operation, whether it's from weather events and from economic factors. One important effect of conservation that is rarely discussed is the effect on local economies. Conservation has a positive impact on local communities. Conservation practices require technical assistance equipment, technical assistance and inputs to implement, and become a driver of economic health. And when once installed, these practices ease the burden on local infrastructure, such as bridges and culverts, assisting local governments responsible for these structures. It is clear to me that conservation has a crucial role to play, not only for the benefits to the environment, but as an engine as we look to recover and rebuild our economy. Now for the challenges. NRCS staffing continues to be a challenge. Conservation delivery relies on adequate field staff. Demand for technical assistance has remained constant or increased, while staffing levels have declined. I hope Congress will continue to support the USDA in streamlining the process of hiring new employees. Congress should encourage even greater direct hiring authority for NRCS field staff. One tool that has allowed conservation districts to help meet landowners' needs is NACD's Technical Assistance Grant Program. Since 2018, NACD has worked in partnership with NRCS to administer grants to conservation districts and other local conservation entities. These funds are matched by state and local contributions. By empowering local decision makers to prioritize funding where they need it, NACD's Technical Assistance Grant Program has helped temporarily improve staffing where it's needed the most. The current COVID-19 pandemic has presented a new set of challenges for conservation delivery. NRCS and conservation districts have instituted face-to-face work that, while important, have disrupted operations. Conservation districts are also concerned about the impact of state and local budget cuts. We worry that the pandemic caused revenue shortfalls and associated budget cuts for state and local governments will trickle down to districts that receive funding from our state and or county. Any cut in district staff will have a direct effect on the delivery of Farm Bill conservation programs. I appreciate the invitation to speak before the subcommittee this morning on a topic that is so close to my heart, and look forward to answering any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Palmer. And Mr. Patterson, please begin whenever you are ready.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chairwoman Spanberger, and thanks to all the members of the subcommittee on this very important subject. I appreciate the opportunity to share some of the things we're doing in Virginia to help with conservation and water quality issues across the Commonwealth, some of which are successes and some of which are challenges. My name is Steve Patterson. I serve as a Senior VP of Marketing, Communications and Government Affairs at Southern States, which is a 97-year-old farmer-owned cooperative based in Richmond, Virginia, and reside in the 7th Congressional District, as was mentioned earlier. 35-year veteran, graduate of University of Kentucky in agronomy, which is the study of the science and economics of food and fiber production. Early in my career, I was a regional agronomist, and during that tenure, I had the opportunity to earn the qualifications of Certified Crop Advisor, Certified Professional Agronomist, and Nutrient Management Specialist in Virginia and Maryland. And it was one of the hardest exams I've ever taken, by the way, but it was very good. I share that information because I want you to know that I and Southern States understand and care about the nature of nutrients and the nature of both on growing crops and for affecting water quality via leaching and or runoff and these type of things. So it's very important that we understand those things because it affects our streams, rivers, bays, estuaries. I also had the opportunity to be part of the launch of precision ag technology on the East Coast, which allows for much more precise applications of nutrients in farmers' fields based on an intense soil testing methodology and variable rate equipment technology. This allows for prescriptive rates of nutrients to be applied in different parts of the same field based on intensive soil testing, whereas before this technology was available, the same amount may be applied across the whole field, which was not good for the crop or good for the farmer's economics. We now have over 1 million acres under some form of precision ag technology across our operating territory. A number of agronomy specialists that work with farmers every day on soil testing, nutrient management plans, improving crop yields, while also mitigating nutrient leaching or transport via erosion in the water system. As leaders, we are working with new product technology that shows promise of delivering slow release nitrogen to crops while at the same time reducing leaching of nitrogen by approximately 49%. This is a potential game-changing product that's coming down the pipe. Better yet, this product originates from waste materials and reduces the amount of material going into landfills, creating a more circular economy and also adding more organic matter to the soil and improving soil health. I'm proud to say we're partnering with the Virginia Department of Conservation to reduce leaching and runoff of nitrogen, phosphorus, sediment, spread the message of the importance of soil testing, nutrient management, no-till practices, utilizing grass buffer strips, cover crops, and the 4 R's of nutrient management: the right source, the right rate, the right time, and the right place. Virginia's goal of achieving 85% of the acreage in the Chesapeake Bay watershed to have a nutrient management plan by 2025 is definitely doable, but only if private and public organizations work together. We need continued cooperation from our partners at the NRCS, Department of Conservation and Recreation in Virginia, the Soil and Water Conservation Districts, and industry to achieve that goal. As was already mentioned, continue to increase funding for conservation programs from the state and federal governments is needed to reach those goals. This is especially true in a time of a pandemic and a prolonged downturn in the farm economy, in which farmers have limited resources. Nutrient management is the kind of practice we embrace. It aligns with our goal to recommend products and services that are agronomically sound, environmentally responsible, and cost-effective for our farmers. They are site-specific and based on factors such as soil and manure samples, timing, and rate of application. We, along with all these organizations we mentioned, including land-grant universities, provide crucial technical assistance to our farmers to implement these practices. But there remains a shortage of qualified planners that needs to be addressed moving forward. That's one of our big challenges. We need more trained professionals in the field providing these services to our farmers. It's very important as we move forward that agriculture has a seat at the table discussing climate change, that decisions are based on sound science, and that decisions protect the economic livelihood of our farmers. We're proud to work with organizations such as the Ag Retailers Association, the National Council of Farmer Cooperatives, Farm Bureau, Virginia Agribusiness Council on these issues, as we are all much stronger working together versus a fragmented approach across various organizations. American agriculture is a modern-day success story. Our farmers produce the world's safest, most abundant food supply for consumers at prices far lower than the world average. Cooperatives have been at the forefront of proactive work to improve the environment in the communities they serve. From pest management to nutrient management, from the development of cutting-edge technologies to implementation of wide area conservation practices, farmer cooperatives have the expertise and the credibility to serve as the best source for information regarding production practices. This is a reason we've been around for almost 100 years. Our farmer owners trust us to help them with the complexities of crop and livestock production and the necessity of improving water quality in our respective states while producing profitable and sustainable yields. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here today, and I'll stop there and take any questions at the right time. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Patterson. And thank you, Dr. Waldrop. Please begin when you are ready.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Great, wonderful. Chairman Spanberger, Ranking Member LaMalfa, and members of the committee, thank you so much for providing this opportunity for Ducks Unlimited to testify today. You know, this certainly has been a challenging year, so we really appreciate the chance to talk to you today about some of the great conservation work that we've been able to deliver during these very trying times. You know, since 1937, Ducks Unlimited has conserved, managed, and restored wetlands and associated habitats for North America's waterfowl. However, wetlands also provide a lot of benefit for people in ways that we're not even really, a lot of people are not aware of, either directly or indirectly, through things like flood control or water quality improvement, erosion control, or even recreation like hunting, kayaking, and wildlife watching. We can only achieve our mission of conserving waterfowl habitat through diverse public and private partnerships. Specifically, the USDA and NRCS have been fantastic partners in our conservation delivery efforts throughout the years, and we certainly cannot appreciate them enough during these difficult times with the pandemic. Ducks Unlimited and many other mid-sized nonprofits have been hit particularly hard by COVID-19 restrictions on gatherings. For example, Ducks Unlimited, we had to cancel thousands of events this past year, fundraising events that cost, millions in event income that we were expecting for our budgets this past year. However, a bright spot during these difficult times has been our continued conservation delivery by our dedicated team who they stayed in campers and trailers and ice fish houses to be able to continue to deliver their important conservation work throughout this pandemic. And we're very proud of the work that they have done and the sacrifices that they made. Much like our friends in the farming and ranching community who have been severely impacted by COVID-19, DU continues to deliver no matter the hurdles that we face. Some ag groups are even doubling down, like the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. They're working on sustainable multiple use practices. And we even just recently signed an MOU with them outlining our shared commitment to cultivate healthier ecosystems, wildlife populations, and economies through active management like cattle grazing. It's not only through the partnerships that we've created with producers and the dedicated NRCS staff. Without those partnerships and those dedicated NRCS staff across the country, we wouldn't have been able to deliver our conservation efforts and continue them today. Just 2 weeks ago, NRCS announced that DU and our partners had been awarded an $8.7 million RCPP grant to develop a producer-focused program to improve soil quality in the prairies of the Dakotas and in Montana. And this program will offer interested farmers and ranchers technical assistance and financial assistance to adopt soil health practices. And this was alluded to, I think, earlier by Chief Norton and Congressman Pingree as well. So, one area where our partnerships are really taking off, another area is in Iowa, and where we've been working with the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship recently to help deliver CREF and aid in Iowa's nutrient reduction strategy. Additionally, in coordination with these great government partners, we've been able to team up with some great corporate partners like Nestle, Purina, Wells Fargo, and Microsoft to kind of help scale up the conservation delivery in the area because it's to meet effort demand by producers as well. Not only, so these wetlands, as they're created, they're going to, the natural wetlands help reduce the nitrates in the water, reducing in cleaner water. But also, since approximately 1.5 million gallons of water can be held in just 1 acre of wetland, wetlands also do an amazing job of reducing flooding and soil erosion during heavy rainfall events. Another partnership that DU is extremely proud of, it's been mentioned a couple of times, is our ongoing collective rice efforts that have vitally supported by NRCS and through the RCPP. USA Rice, Ducks Unlimited, and supporters are in the process of delivering conservation on nearly 800,000 acres in 6 major rice-producing states, mostly in the Southeast and in California. And the Rice Stewardship Partnership was created to support farmers first. And that's something that DU takes a lot of pride in. In fact, Al Montna, DU's Senior Vice President for Policy, is deeply involved in the Rice Stewardship Program. And he's a prominent rice farmer in the Sacramento Valley as well. So DU strongly believes in these and other voluntary incentive-based conservation programs like ASAP. When producers are given economically viable options to improve their land through conservation practices, they support and seek these programs. And DU will continue to follow the lead of our agriculture partners and urge Congress to continue to support these critical conservation tools. In closing, Ducks Unlimited is proud and grateful to be carrying on our mission during this pandemic. We greatly value our producer partners who are stewards of these lands. and we rely on our partners to help to conserve and restore waterfowl habitat to benefit both wildlife and people. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today, and we look forward to continuing our partnership with NRCS in helping America's farmers and ranchers sustainably produce the food, fiber, and fuel that we all depend on. Be happy to answer any questions at this time.
Thank you, Dr. Waldrop. And Mr. Kappas, please begin when you are ready. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Chairwoman Spanberger, Ranking Member LaMalfa, and members of the subcommittee. Greetings from the kind of weirdly quiet campus of the University of Illinois. And thank you very much for inviting me to testify today. I'm going to focus my remarks on working lands conservation, and I want to try to use a lens based on competition. And if I may, I'd like to ground my remarks a little bit in the learned experiences of my dad, Bill Kappas. My family's farm, as you mentioned, is in Western Ohio, and I got to admit that most of what I know about farming and conservation, I can credit to him. And look, I'm not at all objective, but I would argue that my dad represents the best in American farmers. He's a natural contrarian, an experimenter, as well as a committed conservationist who has lived out the basic concept that he sees it as his responsibility to leave things better than he found them. So a couple examples. In 1998, he convinced my grandfather at the time to go all in on no-till, replacing all the tillage equipment to avoid even being tempted to go back on no-till. He's also one of the first in our area, if not the first, to start experimenting with cover crops. In fact, he and my brother added wheat to the operation, corn and soybean farm, around 2007 in order to break up the rotation and improve the ability to establish cover crops. They've had some pretty amazing experiences with cover cropping over the years. But they've never really done better than break even on the wheat, even as they've progressed around cover cropping itself. And that leads me to this comment I want to make about competition. So here's another story. About a dozen years ago, they took on a new lease. The soils on the fields were in pretty bad shape, and so they went to work using no-till and cover crops to improve soil health and soil quality. A couple of years ago then, one of the larger, more aggressive farmers in the area wanted that lease and offered a much higher cash rent. Now look, to the landlord's credit, he appreciated what Dad and my brother were doing, and he stuck with them, they kept the lease. But please recognize that had the other farmer succeeded, years of work and sunk costs invested to improve the health and quality of those soils would have gone to the next farmer, the new tenant, who would benefit from that work, but was probably unlikely to continue it. And this is kind of that tough reality around competition, particularly at the local level on things like cash rent, as well as what farmers are willing and able to pay for those rare fields that actually come up for sale. These are common advantages for larger, aggressive farmers who are able and willing to bid up and then spread out the cost on a larger acreage footprint. And I wouldn't dismiss some of the contribution we're seeing from the expanded amount of payments going in. So look, conservation takes work. It adds risk and management complexity. The farmer has to be willing to experiment and learn by trial and error. And more, right? After more than 30 years of no-till and more than a dozen years of using cover crops, Dad still hears significant skepticism around the area. The self-assured assuring themselves and anyone who will listen that it just won't work. So conservation comes with costs, real costs. It's an investment that will not likely to be returned in any crop year and probably unlikely to ever exceed the total cost. So consider some of the budget analysis that I want to highlight from my colleague, Dr. Gary Schnicke here at Illinois, looking at Midwest corn and soybean farms. He's finding right now negative returns for 2018 and 2019. Those returns have been offset somewhat by the positive returns for soybeans. So negative on corn, positive on soybeans. But much of the worst of this is being prevented by the really large payments that we've seen come out the last couple of years. And so as he looks forward with 2020 and 2021, he's forecasting a worsening situation, the degree of bad really depending on the amount of payments that may or may not be there. So for example, in 2019 for Illinois, if we blend the corn and soybean budgets together at a 50-50 rotation, the farm would lose about $100 per acre without any federal payments, but pulls just above the break-even point around $5 an acre with those payments. So we see that significant situation. It should go without saying that losing money per acre makes for a rather difficult management situation. Now try adding costs for conservation practices. If you're investing in conservation, you're unlikely to have room in the budget to pencil out top dollar land purchases or top dollar cash rents. You're not out there buying the new equipment And that can have a cascading series of consequences, some of which may be more painful than others. And there are only so many options for cutting costs. Each can have implications for the farmer's ability to compete, and that can be magnified as we add costs through conservation. How do we help farmers adopt conservation and stay competitive? Clearly, cost share federal assistance can really help if it's available. For example, Illinois EQIP might pay $45 an acre for cover crops, which would make up the difference for the cost of that. But is there ever enough funding available to hit the acreage we need? For example, last 10 years or so, we've averaged about $13 million per year. So at $45 an acre, that's only 288,000 acres. Half of it for livestock, we're down to less than 150,000 acres. In a state like Illinois that has 24 million acres of cropland, it would probably take about $1 billion a year just to cover with cover crops. So this is kind of where I'm sort of making an argument for rethinking in some form or fashion some of the working lands conservation policies, and doing so in a way that better blends elements of risk, price, yield, revenue, that are the focus of farm programs and crop insurance. I also want to briefly raise the need for more research, and in particular, more and better data. 2018 Farm Bill made strides in that way around data, but data that crosses the lines between conservation, crop insurance, risk management, financial management, and more, that really is comprehensive around the farming operation. I also want to just highlight a couple of quick examples around research and demonstration, one of which is the Precision Conservation Management Project led by the Illinois corn growers, and has received RCPP funding and is really designed to help blend that financial management and the conservation adoption and management process. And also I get a kind of a lucky timing. Today, a project I'm a part of is launching a web-based cover crop decision support tool for farmers in Illinois to allow them to get a sort of dashboard readout of what modeling work would simulate cover crops are doing in those fields. And we'll have a Farm Doc Daily article on that here later today that'll provide the website and more information. So let me just conclude with reiterating this perspective from the farmer around working lands conservation. The importance of those policies being relevant to issues of risk and competition, and helping adopt conservation and better compete in what is becoming an increasingly difficult farm economy, which has been discussed across the board. So policies that better blend farm risk and conservation should result in a much better return on that taxpayer investment. And there's as many ways to achieve this as there are program components. Because ultimately the challenge we have here is we look at these policies is, on the farm program and support side, these are very relevant to the farmer's operation, but they raise questions about the return to the taxpayer. On the conservation side, we have clear return to the taxpayer, cleaner water and less soil erosion. But we challenge at times with this relevance to the farmer and this focus on issues of risk and management. So blending these and looking for ways to do so, and I've got a few ideas in the written testimony I'm happy to take questions about. But I think there's a lot here that we can explore and work with or work towards, particularly should the next Farm Bill discussion begin anytime in the near future. With that, I'm sorry I went over. I appreciate the opportunity to be here to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kappas. At this time, members will be recognized for questions in order of seniority, alternating between majority and minority members. We will be recognized for 5 minutes each in order to allow us to get to as many questions as possible. Please keep your microphones muted until you are recognized in order to minimize background noise. When 1 minute is left, the light will turn yellow, signaling time is close to expiring. I will begin by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. And I'd like to draw on a theme that I heard from Mr. Kappas and Mr. Patterson. So, Mr. Kappas, you told a brief story about the efforts that your father began undertaking on his farm as early as 1998. New practices, no-till, cover crop. You mentioned some of the skepticism that he still continues to experience from his neighbors. And then, Mr. Patterson, you were talking about the shortages of qualified professionals. And I was wondering if both of you could comment on what you see in terms of workforce needs, in terms of expertise. What are those shortages that we should be looking at that would ensure that we could continue moving forward in the conservation space in a place that benefits the local economy, benefits farmers and producers, and certainly benefits, has the overall positive benefits of conservation practices. And I'll open it up to either of you to begin with your feedback to that, very general question.
Steve, go ahead.
Excuse me?
I believe he opened it to you, Mr. Patterson, first.
Okay, I think one of the biggest challenges based on visiting with people that work for the state of Virginia, future management specialists that work for the state of Virginia. One of the biggest challenges is just the number of people that write, the number of people that are technical service providers, and the ability to work with each other to make sure we're getting as much acreage under these plans as we possibly can. So I think it does go back to what's been mentioned times today, which is more funding, both state and the federal level for these type of positions going forward.
And Mr. Kappas, would you want to add anything to that?
Well, I absolutely agree that the personnel on this is incredibly important. I want to just say briefly that having had the chance to work with Chief Norton when he was on Detail Senate Ag Committee, I appreciate hearing and seeing him today, even virtually, and know he does great work. But it's an example of the kind of incredible effort that comes out of the agencies to help out and help farmers as they sort through the variety of issues that you need around managing and putting in place and maintaining conservation practices. So that's critical. The federal water conservation districts are incredibly important as well in that. And investing in these infrastructure, particularly at this time with stressed state budgets, as was mentioned, state and local budget challenges. So I see a lot of opportunity there to invest in the people that help carry this out and help farmers adopt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kappas. And that leads me beautifully into my next question, which is focused on COVID-19 and the public health crisis. As you mentioned, state and local budgets have been hit hard, and especially when some had only just begun recovering from a prior economic recession. I have been a strong advocate for federal support to state and local governments in any future COVID relief-related package, and given the soil and water conservation districts and their dependence on state and local funds, in addition to federal resources. Mr. Palmer, could you comment on what challenges we might see if there's not additional support to state and local governments and what that might mean for conservation efforts across the country?
Yes, Madam Chair. I thank you for the opportunity to address this. So we have a system that's put in place based on partnerships. The relationship between the citizenry of my county with our local Soil and Water Conservation District Board and our relationship with our state and national partners. And then that all helps the producers to better tend their land and provide that safe and secure food supply that we all rely upon. So given the fact that budgets are being stressed because of these outside influences from COVID, the sales tax that's coming into the state of Iowa is going to be very, very light compared to what it was, just because so many businesses have been closed. Those dollars are going to have to readjust budgets. They're going to have to look at where they can cut prices, cut places where they can make budget cuts. We're very afraid that that can affect our local county budgets in many ways, and put more of the shoulder of the management onto the shoulders of our local citizenry with property taxes and other ways.
Thank you very much, Mr. Palmer, and thank you to the witnesses again for your answers and for being here today. I now recognize the gentleman from Georgia for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman, and thank you, panel, for being with us today. My first question is to all of the panelists, and of course we heard about the problems with staffing, but from the standpoint of challenges that you have witnessed that prevent producers from adopting conservation practices, what is the resistance to adopting these practices? Could all of you comment on that, please?
I can comment on that. This is Steve. I specifically asked that question of an individual the other day here in Virginia. And his answer was kind of surprising. He goes, I almost hate to admit this, but the producers do not trust myself, talk about himself, like they trust southern states. And I think the opportunity there is, I really think that we need to start communicating more with each other. And that means sitting down with the Department of Conservation, sitting down with SDS more often, understanding the challenges on each side and bridging that gap in communication, because I think there's a real gap there, and we can help bridge together.
Would any of the other panelists care to comment on the challenges with farmers adopting these programs, farmers and ranchers?
Yes, I would take a shot at that. One thing that we are dealing with is a generational transition from older farming ways to and habits to equipment, different technologies that we're able to work with today. But that conception that has been supported over time by nutrient recommendations, other things that we have gotten over time that have not caught up with the innovation now are still a holdback to the way things are done. Also, the disappearance of livestock from our landscape in Iowa, for example, has really changed the way that land can be utilized. Where I could use cover crops in my operation to grow beef, others don't have that luxury, and it makes it difficult for them to think about growing something that's going to compete with the crop and the management that comes along with it, without being able to fully realize the long-term effects of something that's going to be stored in the soil and the effects it has on the soil.
Mr. Patterson, with regard to the staffing issue and the advent of technology in dealing with conservation practices, can you tell me what we've been able to do technically to accelerate this program and to be good conservationists, and how that affects staffing and the abilities of staff to deal with new technologies in the conservation area?
If I understand your question right, I think their technologies are being adapted. I think that there's a agreement that the technology industry is bringing to the fields, such as precision technology, the communication technology available. Once again, I think it's a matter of more of a team approach between government and industry working together for the what all is available. And I'm not sure I answered your question.
Right. Yes, and what I was trying to tie together is the staffing issues versus technology. As we know, technology can reduce the requirement of the number of people involved in the process, and in manufacturing and other industries are adopting that. But you bring up a really good point, and I'll finish up as my time runs out with this. It sounds like, the biggest problem I have with the federal government is this one-size-fits-all top-down approach, and it really looks like that we need to empower our farmers and ranchers to work together with the federal government to come up with the right practices. And thank you, Chairwoman, and I yield back.
The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Maine for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to all the panelists. I really appreciated hearing from all of you, and thought that there was a lot of interesting information there. Mr. Kappas, right, you talked a little bit about the point that programs are about doing the right thing, but also conservation needs to make financial sense for the farmers, which is certainly a huge challenge. What potential do you see for additional incentives for things like carbon sequestration, either government-led or from the private sector, in addressing that issue as a potential another revenue source?
Yes, thank you, Congresswoman. I actually think there's incredible potential there, because what we're talking about, and you know, the setting up a market or getting that market jump started is no small hurdle. So I don't want to you know, underplay that. But the idea that those practices begin, whether it's ecosystem services or carbon market, those practices at the farm level, that extra work, that extra time, the complexity and management the farmer puts into it, gets rewarded back based on what they're doing, it is an incredible opportunity. You know, I talked about the competitive aspect of farmers. I think of the idea of a carbon market or ecosystem market as really turning that farmer competition in a healthy way towards trying to maximize what they can store in soils through cover crops and that sort of thing. I think it's a great opportunity.
Just a quick follow-up. So a lot of conversation goes on about the best kinds of measurements. Is it about inputs or is it about performance? Also, who should be engaged? And there's a fair amount of thinking and some legislation that says this is a role for the USDA. Do you have an opinion on either of those topics?
I think USDA would have an important role in all of that, in helping measure, helping work with the farmers, and particularly that technical assistance around, you know, adopting those practices in the field. A shameless plug, I think our land-grant universities and extension system themselves would be an incredible partner, along with the soil and water conservation districts for that as well.
And I wholeheartedly support your shameless plug. All really important and underfunded and underutilized. Just another thing, and while I appreciate all the other panelists, I don't want to shun them, but I just have another question from your perspective. So you've done some analysis on farmers' financial decision-making, as we were talking about, and how these practices fit into management and budget choices. Can you talk a little bit about how you consider climate change-related risks? For example, reduced yields for extended drought, like most states are experiencing, we're even experiencing in Maine, which is unusual, when you're conducting those analysis? And just as a second part of that, how do we make sure that crop insurance programs recognize the climate-related risks and better incorporate conservation practices that might mitigate them? Two big explosive topics.
That is a very big and difficult question. I appreciate it. I think we have to do a better job, just to be perfectly frank, across the board as we examine risks for farming. And it's not just droughts and wildfires and floods. It's things like the incredibly short planting season being drastically impacted by spring rains and that sort of thing, right? And if you think about a cover crop practice that you've got to terminate in that same time period, this just adds that set of challenges. So I think beginning to do a lot more, the data issue, the data needs, like the 2018 Farm Bill included more work around data. So to me, you know, particularly with crop insurance, it's a data intensive effort. So a lot of that has got to be moving in that direction. But it's a challenge. It's such an unknown. And I think the more we build in resilient efforts, the more we're thinking about this, not just in terms of can I get in this year and make it through, although that can't be discounted. But what does this mean longer term? If I can work this in and begin to be more resilient over the longer term, those are important factors. But I don't want to discount the difficulty that's going to have.
Absolutely, but really important. One last little sort of section of this, and this has come up with a couple of other people, and again, I'm just going to ask you the question. So this whole issue about when you're a tenant farmer, you're renting, you do those inputs, you really had a great example of your father's experience, but do you have a little bit more to say about how to get more landowner buy-in in those programs and what way to incentivize that?
Well, I think I'm not sure how necessarily to incentivize it. I think that's a question that is one really to chew through and work on and wrestle over. One of the things we've been trying to do through the Farm Back project that I also know some schools have been doing as well is working on that lease. So we've created conservation addendums for this sort of model farm leases that we provide out. that are available on the website, and we've done some webinars around that to say, look, this is a contract between you and the farmer or you and the landlord. The more you negotiate and talk about these things, explain what you're doing, which again is an experience my dad had. The more you explain no-till, that it's not just leaving trash on the field, but it's actually doing beneficial work for the soil, or why is something growing green in early March, right? Working through those issues in advance in that lease is a huge step forward for the farmers and the landlord, because they are working those issues out and everybody can then better understand it. So that's one area kind of in the near term. Incentives and all that is a difficult topic to work out.
I totally understand. And again, thank you. I'm out of time, but again, I have a couple of other questions and I'll submit it for the record. But thank you again to the other panelists, and particular shout out to Ducks Unlimited. You guys do such great work in all of our states, and appreciate your plowing through during this challenging time. Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
The chair now recognizes the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. For Dr. Waldrop from Ducks Unlimited, again, thank you for being part of this panel here. I wanted to ask you a couple thoughts about the issue with the Klamath Lake and Klamath Basin and the refuge up there. And what are your thoughts on, and what's Ducks Unlimited's view on what should be going on there, and what can they do to help push for the water supply that we need, et cetera? How much, what's DU's involvement on that?
So I don't have a lot of details for you on Klamath. I know we are involved up there and we are working with partners and everything. I would have to defer to our regional specialist on some details regarding any of the issues. Is there something specific regarding that? Are you talking about like as far as water supply and everything else?
Well, we have as you know, a terrible duck kill up there on the lake with a water supply problem that that we can go all day on that itself here. But the water has to come through the agricultural system up there in order to reach the refuges, and the supply was short this season, even though many of us thought there was plenty of water in the lake. So, does DU part of advocacy for more water through the ag system into the refuge? Because again, we have a disaster in the Pacific Flyway in the making with the duck kill going up there.
Yes, sir. So in that respect, absolutely, we're working again with partners and doing other things that we can do to help deliver water. There's a lot of what we've been working on as far as projects to help with that water delivery and to help with Klamath and the refuge and ensuring that those water supplies are there. And of course, water is a huge issue in California and all throughout those western states. So it's something that is always being worked on and improved. But I think through the partnerships that we're encouraged to work on projects that will help with the water delivery in that situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're right. It's a big problem, and with all of the ag partners out there, whether it's rice or anything else, and being able to flood those waters at different times to provide important nutrients and food and water for waterfowl is extremely important, which goes back to a lot of these programs that are, so critical in that area and others throughout that region to ensure not only, good ag production, but also good habitat, food, water for waterfowl as well.
Yeah, the rice, of course, the 500,000 acres of it, 2-3 hours, 4 hours south of that area is a good partner. A lot of the nesting goes on up north there in the Klamath, but it does emphasize that we need to work with the NRCS to have more nesting and cover to be able to be set aside, maybe actually in rice country too, since the lake situation is pretty dire. Again, I was up there some weeks ago there. We went out on an airboat and we were, recovering a lot of dead duck carcasses, but also saved some saved some live ones that were surviving, and they had a duck hospital up there, just one edge of the lake area, and they were getting a 90% recovery on the rescued sick ducks. So that was pretty amazing. So, but we do need to have maybe more partnership opportunities with NRCS down in rice country for fallowed ground, and the ability to have more nesting and more habitat farther down in the valley too, and spread this risk out. Am I doing that?
I think that would be, fabulous idea. And, with a lot of the wetlands being lost all through, Sacramento Valley and all in through there, that rice really has become a very important part of the nutrient availability, whether it's nesting or food availability, much more than it was decades ago. So very important to keep those programs going.
All right, well, I've already eaten up all my time, so thank you for that. I'll yield back.
The chair now recognizes Representative Axne from Iowa.
Thank you, Chairwoman Spanberger, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today. I'm going to go straight to my Iowa friend. Tim, I first want to quickly talk about the derecho that hit Iowa just a few weeks ago, and certainly I'm thankful that most of our district wasn't as impacted as other parts of Iowa, but with your position in Iowa agriculture, what have you been hearing about the recovery efforts for our farmers?
Thanks for that question, Congresswoman. It is going to be, and I don't think anybody knows really what we're dealing with right now. The recommendations to destroy a crop or try to harvest it, it's going to be a trail of tears until we get through well into next year trying to figure out what the effects of leaving a crop and working it into the soil as opposed to trying to harvest it. There's just no way to plan for something like that. Every conservation practice in the world wouldn't offset the damage that was done there. Hopefully, the nutrients that are recaptured can help buffer the producers that didn't harvest this year, and with the addition of the crop insurance, they can survive to grow another year. But it's going to be very difficult.
Well, thank you for that update. My colleagues have heard me talk about this before, but just so that everyone who's watching and is on this is aware, Iowa has suffered a rare derecho which swept across the Midwest. We've never seen this storm before, and unfortunately, we had hardly any notice to prepare for it. It destroyed farmland, buildings, equipment, leaving millions without power. Actually, for weeks, hundreds of thousands still didn't have power. And then, of course, last year we had historic flooding in my district along the Missouri, which folks are still recovering from. So this couldn't be a more appropriate hearing today because we are seeing these unusual weather events due to changes in climate happening more and more. And the more that we can do from a conservation perspective to help protect against this impact, the better off we'll be. Tim, I wanted to ask you, you touched upon this in your written testimony, but I'd be interested to have you expand a bit on it. How can conservation programs make operations more resilient to help farmers recover from disasters after they occur?
And if I may interrupt quickly, could all the witnesses mute their microphones if they're not answering? We're getting some feedback in the hearing room. Thank you.
Okay now?
Perfect.
Thanks again for the question, Congresswoman. When you're utilizing the current conservation practices that we have long-standing conservation practices that have been vetted and enhanced for decades. Terraces and ponds and the structures that we have put on the landscape that help mitigate the effects of flooding. Our PL 566 program. A lot of producers are not in those areas, maybe under an organized watershed program, but their ability to have access to the technical support to build terraces and waterways and buffer areas is going to help retain their soil, if they can retain their soil, it's going to be there for production for the next year and more sustainable. And if they add in the current knowledge that we have with cover crops and soil health measures, being able to store carbon with growing plants more of the year, it's going to eventually affect their bottom line because of the reduced inputs that they're going to be putting in to a crop.
Well, thank you. And I also want to make sure that farmers are part of any climate-focused efforts in Congress and that our farmers have buy-in as well so we can work towards that more resilient environment to ensure our farmers have that opportunity. Your written testimony succinctly laid out how landowners work with conservation districts, and you called it a gold standard. So I'm so grateful for that. Can you speak a little bit more to how districts and local working groups help inform NRCS in delivering the programs available through the Farm Bill that can help us create more buy-in from producers?
So, dealing with the COVID problem has really opened a door for us with outreach to more people. With the Zoom technology, where we have the capability of producers and general citizens that haven't been involved or haven't had an understanding of what conservation districts can do to make their own little environment better. We've had the opportunity to reach out to them and get their input without trying to set up a meeting where they had to drive and sit there and wonder what this was all about. But the one-on-one that we've had the opportunity with is really important. That local input of what is desired in Madison County, for example. What resources do we need to treat? We need to be environmentally sound in our ag production, but the resource areas, the oak savannas, the wetlands, the things that we could provide as natural habitat that also have recreational opportunities. We take that input from them, we turn that into a plan, but we pass that on to our state headquarters in Des Moines so that it's part of the overall planning for Madison County and for the state and for the country to take all that local information, turn it into programs that fit those priorities.
Well, thank you. We're out of time, so I yield back, but I'm looking forward to working with you more on this in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you.
The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Ohio.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is for Mr. Kappas. Mr. Kappas, good morning. While we passed the most recent Farm Bill, not even 2 years ago, the next Farm Bill is always in front of us. This summer, you and your colleagues at Farm Doc wrote a piece that world market conditions suggest set-asides are not an effective farm policy for corn and soybeans. What led you to this conclusion? And in your view, if the next Farm Bill were to go all in on supply management programs such as acreage set-asides, what would be the impact on our farmers, our rural communities in the U.S. as an ag exporter?
Well, thank you, Congressman, and certainly the set-aside issue is no easy matter to unfold. It's got a long history, and so we were trying to break down what the variety of challenges are, right? So if you take acres out of production in America for world traded commodities, then we're going to see acreage expand somewhere else. Brazil is a great example, and if they continue burning rainforests to plant soybeans, we've not helped anybody's situation out much. So I think and what we were really focusing on was the historic set aside. Every farmer puts 10 or 15% in a set aside program in order to be eligible for program assistance. And we find that it is a challenge around the world market situation. It is a challenge around even controlling supply. In fact, historically, set aside acres have been less than effective in controlling supply, largely because what you're going to do is put your worst acres under set aside, and you end up maximizing production on the acres that remain in farming. And so one of the things that we see is just that this policy was set aside, not to reuse the word, it was terminated in 1996 when we went decoupled acres and a different farm policy setup. And so we do not think that there's a real value, particularly if we're looking to improve prices and those things. That being said, I also think, again, talking about conservation, there may be avenues in which it isn't a set-aside program, but there is a lot of things we can do in fields across this country, from buffers and waterways and other things that will be both conservation focused and work in on the acres that are farming. So we continue to try to sort this out. And this is a question that's come up quite a bit from farmers. And I think it's also indicative of just the the tough economic environment they find themselves in to ask about set aside again.
Okay,
Thank
thank you. My follow-up question, you pretty much answered that. I was asking for some, what lessons we can learn from the acreage set-aside programs from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. If you want to add to that, you could, but thank you.
Thank you, sir. I don't know if I have anything more I can add to it, so I appreciate it.
Madam Chair, I yield back. Thank you.
Excellent. Before we adjourn, I invite the ranking member to share any closing comments that he may have.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm appreciative of the panel and of Chief Norton's time here today as the conservation programs that we know in ag and rural America have been very helpful in achieving the goals of habitat for wildlife and waterfowl, as well as make great partnerships for farmers to keep farming. So as we heard today from USDA and Natural Resource Conservation Service, as well as our partners with like Ducks Unlimited and what that means to us in Northern California, but across the whole fruited plain is extremely important. So I appreciate this opportunity today, Madam Chair, for being able to hear them out and have an interaction and advise and know that our doors are open for continued work and streamlining and improvement in how the process works. So thank you again, and I'll yield back.
Thank you very much. And to our witnesses, thank you for your testimony today. This conversation has been so interesting. I have notes surrounding me, particularly in light of how we could look to conservation to be part of the solution as we look to resolve and solve for resource challenges presenting by a rapidly changing climate and certainly the COVID-19 public health crisis. I'd like to thank USDA staff and their entire conservation community, including our farmers who are out there pushing forward on innovative on-farm conservation practices, even amid the uncertainty that we've outlined today. I thank them for their work in these tremendous times, and I thank all of the witnesses for your work, your research, your dedication, and your focus on these vitally important issues. I look forward to continuing the work with all of you all, as well as with my colleagues here on the committee. As we continue to implement conservation programs under the 2018 Farm Bills, take active measures to continue to protect the environment and combat the climate crisis, and as we look ahead to work together towards our economic recovery, these conversations are so vitally important and certainly in the back of all of our minds, informing our future work on future farm bills. It is a pleasure to have welcomed you all here today. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for your testimony. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your work. And under the rules of the committee, the record of today's hearing will remain open for 10 calendar days to receive additional material and supplementary written responses from the witnesses to any question posed by a member. This hearing of the Subcommittee on Conservation and Forestry is adjourned.